Hi, I'm Warren Watson, the director of the J Ideas Initiative at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Our program promotes excellence in student journalism, First Amendment awareness, and media literacy. We work with students, teachers, principals, and administrators to promote a better understanding of the First Amendment, its value in our democracy, and the important rights it guarantees. The First Amendment is under fire today, and adults and youngsters alike do not have a strong appreciation for its role in our society. We produced this video especially for high school principals and administrators. As the leader in a school, the administrator has to juggle many concerns, including safety, standardized tests, educational standards, community relations, and more. Safeguarding and teaching the Constitution and the First Amendment should also be among those concerns. At Ball State, working with our Teachers College, we have developed a unique course in the First Amendment for school administrators. You'll learn more about the course on this video, and we encourage you all to consider this course, which is offered online. In this video, you will also hear from administrators, teachers, and others about the role of the First Amendment in a school setting. Please enjoy these discussions. Thank you. Hi, I'm Warren Watson. Our J Ideas program has been part of a national study of high school students funded by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation that shows that today's kids have a poor knowledge of and appreciation for the First Amendment, which is the foundation of our liberties. In our work, we discuss various nuances of the First Amendment, including how it is applied in student media. Various court cases have created a structure by which student rights to free speech are applied. There's a lot of confusion about the meaning of such case law, so I'd like to offer some background that you might find useful. In 1969, the Supreme Court ruled on what the Student Press Law Center calls undoubtedly the most important student First Amendment case in the nation's history. Tinker versus Des Moines revolved around student Mary Beth Tinker, who was protesting the Vietnam War. When school officials learned of Tinker and two other students' plans to protest, a policy was adopted banning black armbands. However, Tinker and two other students wore their armbands to school anyway, and they were sent home. When Tinker took the school district all the way to the Supreme Court, judges ruled that it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to free speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. Tinker very strongly explains that students' opinions cannot be stifled because their views clash with the school's opinions. According to the Tinker standard, school officials must make a reasonable forecast of disruption to censor student speech. Press rights started to erode in 1986 with the Bethel versus Frazier case, which surrounded a student's controversial speech. Another important case involving students in the First Amendment is Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer. In this 1988 Supreme Court case, the judges decided that censorship of school-sponsored media is allowed under limited circumstances. While school officials must show that censorship is reasonably related to legitimate educational concerns, many administrators censor without meeting this qualification. The case revolved around Hazelwood East High School near St. Louis and a controversial spread in its student newspaper. The spread focused on problems faced by teenagers, which included pregnancy, divorce, and running away from home. The paper was already under prior review, and its principal pulled the spread before printing the newspaper. We think it's important that principals and administrators thoroughly understand Tinker and Hazelwood because they can be easily misapplied.
Hello, I'm Gerry Appel, Education Specialist for J Ideas. The First Amendment, 45 words that are so simple, yet so important. Within the halls of your school, the First Amendment is just as meaningful as anywhere else. However, according to a study by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, students are taking the First Amendment for granted, and educators are not giving students an appreciation for a free press. Over 100,000 students were surveyed, and 75% said they either do not know how they feel about the First Amendment or they take it for granted. 50% of students believe the government can censor the internet, and more than a third believe the First Amendment goes too far in the rights it guarantees. In a follow-up study, 45% now feel this way. Over 300 principals and administrators were also surveyed, and 24% believe the First Amendment goes too far. 40% of principals also believe the press has too much freedom. However, a strong 80% of principals think the press should be able to publish freely. Just over half of students feel the same way. While most principals believe that the professional press should be able to publish freely, few believe student journalists also have this right. Only a quarter of principals surveyed believe that student media should be able to publish freely. Despite some of these statistics, principals obviously want to have a good relationship with their journalism advisors. So what can you do to help create a stronger relationship? Feel free to meet with your advisor when there is no crisis. Encourage your student publications to draft a policy statement. Find other ways to generate public relations outside of the student paper. And most importantly, agree that the key to responsible media is learning. I think you'll find that these tips, along with others on this DVD, will not only help create stronger student publications, but stronger citizenship as well. Civics is important in our lives, and journalism can be an application of these civics.
Pritch, a lot of principals and superintendents, their main concern, of course, is not only, handling the discipline within their school, but also they're concerned about the public perception of what's going on in their school.
Sure, and I can understand that. I mean, leadership has a very important role to play in public relations. Public relations is a leadership function. So I admire that attention. I think that the challenge is to find some ways to be constructive about exercising that responsibility.
Do you think that that is in the best interest of that school newspaper to be used as a public relations vehicle?
I think it can be, but probably not the way that you or anyone else might think about it. I think that it's certainly an excellent teaching tool for students to understand their rights and responsibilities with regard to the First Amendment. I think that that can be used very beneficially to the better practice of public relations if principals will be transparent in their relationships with the newspaper, student-run newspaper, and if they will give the students the latitude to carry the bad news along with the good news. Because as you do that, you're building credibility in not just the publication, but ultimately in the institution. And that carries through into many other areas that principals can use very effectively for their benefit.
So you think that by them using, principals, administrators, wanting to use the newspaper as a vehicle for public relations, you're saying in essence that you do think it affects credibility. Do you have any words of wisdom that you could pass along to a school administrator so they can understand maybe there is possibly a better vehicle to be used as a public relations tool as opposed to a newspaper? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that there are much better tools to be used for public relations. I think it's important to remember that the credibility and the transparency of the administration with the newspaper is very important, but there are much better vehicles out there. One vehicle that I think is absolutely tailor-made to being a public relations strategy and tactic is a newsletter. A newsletter that focuses on internal audiences, the teachers and staff, but also focuses on families and the community. And I think it's tailor-made. We know from the research that newsletters are read cover to cover. It's one of the only written publications that is really read cover to cover in one sitting. So it really does provide an excellent vehicle for principals and administrators to use to further their public relations goals.
Okay, so there are principals who will say, okay, I don't have the budget for a newsletter. Who's going to write it? Do you have any suggestions on ways that they could actually somehow put forth a document that would serve its purpose?
Actually, a fallacy is that a newsletter is expensive and complicated to produce. Mm-hmm. It is one of the least expensive collateral materials that a public relations specialist uses, and it lends itself very well to compartmentalization, if you will, or delegation. I think that the staff, as long as they don't have a huge chunk, if they don't have to write it and produce it every week or month or quarter, folks like to contribute to telling their story. So parsing the newsletter out into different areas, having different columns, can really be not only a great tool, but a great way to build camaraderie and to build unity of spirit and esprit de corps.
Randy, in addition to journalism classes, most schools have a student publication of some kind. What is the role of student media?
Warren, the role of the school media is to deliver the school mission in a way that integrates all the activities, the events, the issues of the school. It's a catalyst to bring out the dynamic qualities of the school, to motivate students, to recognize their achievement, to get them to thinking about things in depth, beyond just what the surface is.
So student media can actually help the principal.
The student media ought to be the principal's best friend because, for instance, the student newspaper, as an example, usually you have your top students on the newspaper staff. They're natural leaders, and they can help the principal articulate the school mission, and they can help enhance that partnership concept that will involve students in the decision-making process. It'll engage them in ways that will just make your school community better.
So they're learning how to be citizens as well as student journalists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
In schools that have a free and responsible student press, where students are allowed to responsibly present their perspectives on the issues of the day, even though those perspectives may not be in agreement with the officials of the school, the decision makers benefit by learning what the attitudes of the students are. If we don't agree with those attitudes, we better still know what they are so that we can devise strategies.
Hi, my name is Warren Watson. I'm the director of the J Ideas program at Ball State University. We encourage excellence in student journalism, First Amendment awareness, and media literacy. I'm here today with Dr. Joseph McKinney, the chairman of the Department of Educational Leadership at Ball State University, and the creator of a unique course in the First Amendment for principals and administrators. It is a graduate level course focusing on elements of the First Amendment and media law. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Warren. It's good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the course at Ball State and how principals can get involved in this.
Well, Warren, we offer an online asynchronous course. It's called The First Amendment and the School Administrator, and it's been very well received. We've had a lot of very positive feedback from students, and we were really pleased with the course.
And Joe, how do you conduct an online course?
Well, it's really fascinating. It's not just looking at a screen, looking at print. All of our sessions have a video, and so we have a tape lecture or a tape panel discussion. We've gone out into the field and we've talked to people, journalism teachers. We've talked to experts in the field. We also have a discussion thread so that students respond to questions that we put up for them. And really, you generate a lot of discussion on an online course that uses more than just print material. Since it is asynchronous, students love it. They can get on and pick up the course at their own convenience. And we know that school administrators are extremely busy people. They're working 60, 70 hours a week. And it's just tough sometimes to be able to take a course, drive into a university, or even an online course where you have to be there at a certain time. And the way we've structured our online courses is that you never really have to be at a certain, you don't have to be in front of your computer at a certain time. So it's worked out very well for us.
Joe, you're not only an educator, but also a lawyer. and the course covers a lot about media law. Why do you believe the First Amendment is so important in schools?
Well, the First Amendment, represents the hallmark of our liberties. The First Amendment assures freedom of speech, expression, and the press. I think freedom of the press is really the cornerstone of our democracy, and it's so important that students learn to be responsible, to understand that this is a freedom that cannot be taken for granted. Students need to learn to be good citizens, and if a school provides, that outlet, a media outlet, I think it really enhances and improves student participation in exercises that are going to be helpful with respect to them becoming good citizens.
In some places, principals aren't always encouraging of free speech by students. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think that, and I don't want to stereotype all school administrators, of course, but I think that generally administrators are conservative. They work for conservative school boards and superintendents. And, sometimes the school principal feels like he or she is kind of the middle person because they have to be accountable to the school board and to the superintendent. And, sometimes it's probably more expedient, if you will, in terms of operating a school, not to have students going off and raising questions that are important in terms of the greater society, but are questions that some conservative people might think should not be dealt with in a school setting.
Mm-hmm. Joe, the minute administrators review a student publication before it goes to press, they open themselves up for liability. So why do principals and administrators continue to practice prior review of publications?
Well, I don't think principals recognize that they are more likely to be held liable if they are indeed the ones censoring the student publication. A principal would be well advised not to be the person censoring, but to allow students to work with their advisor and decide what should be included in a publication and what should not. I mean, clearly we know that there are certain areas of free speech that are not fully protected. There's not certainly the area of libel, obscenity, creating a substantial disruption, copyright infringement, invasion of privacy. These are 5 areas that pertain to the First Amendment, press and the freedom of press, that do limit what goes into the paper. And a good journalism advisor working with her or his team of students, I think, can make decisions relative to those areas that would be off limits and would open up the school to a lawsuit.
Joe, you've alluded to the Hazelwood and Tinker decisions, which are decisions that principals, administrators, students, and teachers have good familiarity. How can these 2 Supreme Court decisions exist in the same legal arena?
Well, let's start with Hazelwood. That's the 1988 Supreme Court decision that allows school administrators to censor, for lack of a better term, a student publication as long as the administrator has a legitimate educational or pedagogical reason. It says that the school administrator may censor. It doesn't say must censor, and that's a key point in that decision. The Tinker decision sets out a different standard for censoring student press, student speech, and that is that the school administrator would have to be able to reasonably forecast a material and substantial disruption to his or her school, or it's already occurred that there has been because of what was published, there has been a substantial immaterial disruption of the orderly process of the school. And then that would allow the principal to censor. If principals are really interested in promoting diversity of opinion and creating a marketplace of ideas for students and discussing the problems of the day, that they're better off using the Tinker standard.
Mm-hmm. Joe, you know, the First Amendment is now being discussed in cyberspace. Should administrators step in when students create blogs or other internet sites that are critical of the school?
Well, this is certainly an emerging area of legal precedent. And what the courts have said, I think in unison here, is that the Tinker standard should be applied. With respect to off-campus behavior, the Tinker standard does make sense in that if a student is putting something up on their home page that represents a real threat of danger, and I mean real in terms of an imminent threat of danger, then I think the administrator should step in. With respect to being critical of the school, making fun of teachers, maybe making fun of the administrator, I think that administrators need to be very judicious in making a decision to actually discipline a student. I think if that criticism reaches the level where it does present the distinct possibility of a substantial disruption to the orderly process of the school, then an administrator could take action. Now, I'm not suggesting that the first action be a suspension from school. Mm-hmm. It may be a conference with the student, conference with the parent. Oftentimes parents won't know what their kids are doing on, MySpace. So, you may be able to resolve the issue early on, just head off the trouble, and hopefully it hasn't, left too many trails of disaster in its way in terms of things like, invading people's privacy and, making teachers uncomfortable and that sort of thing. But the Tinker standard would apply, I think, in these cases. Obviously, since Columbine, the focus is, for every administrator has been on making sure, bottom line, number one priority, that the school is safe and that it's a good place for kids to come and learn.
We both know that principals and administrators have a difficult job. They're balancing a number of interests in the course of a day. How can they still protect the interests of the school and promote the First Amendment at the same time?
Well, I think the most essential aspect, in terms of answering that question, is that a principal establish a good working relationship with the journalism advisor. And I think that if there's a trust relationship there's a bond between the journalism advisor and the principal, then the principal is not going to have to be too concerned about something being placed in the newspaper that is going to cause threats to the safety of the school.
Mm-hmm. Joe McKinney, thank you for joining us today.
Why should administrators care about the First Amendment?
I think if administrators don't care about the First Amendment, students won't care about the First Amendment. And a long time ago, people fought and died for our Bill of Rights, and we don't need to take the First Amendment for granted, nor to take any of the other amendments for granted. That's what makes our country strong, is that we're able to withstand challenges to the different amendments. The First Amendment probably be the one that we deal with the most, and have it be still a strong country. We don't have the major governmental coups that other countries have when they stand up and say something bad about someone, and it's just a vital part for us. And if administrators don't see that and see the need to share that with students, there's something wrong with education then.
Why is it important to keep the First Amendment alive in schools?
Just because I think kids need to understand that there are lots of areas that we should not take for granted, and the First Amendment is one of them. It gives us a lot of freedoms that are the basis for our country, and that's very important for students to learn and for students to appreciate, not only from their limited perspective now, but as they age and grow and have children of their own, how that's an important part of our country and our society.
So why is there this free speech issue between administrators and students?
Well, I'd say that there's an issue, but it's not a drastic issue. You've got free speech issues related to what the students want to get accomplished, what they believe that their community, their constituents, their co-students, fellow students would like to hear and read about. And then you've got some administrators who 100% support the students in their efforts. And you also have administrators who are more concerned about the image that it may project in their community. So it causes a natural conflict in those environments where one entity is trying to get all the information out and the other entity is trying to only put out certain information. So thus the conflict.
By avoiding censorship, how do principals help students become better citizens?
By avoiding censorship, we force them to be better students, students at their craft, providing accurate, consistent information to all readers. And the readers aren't just limited to students. You've got different members of the faculty who read the publications. You've got members of transportation, the maintenance department. You've got parents. You've got just simple members of the community who are constantly reading this document, who are providing feedback, be that grammatical errors, be that content errors, or be that complete support of the fact that, hey, this is a really good article. So by the lack of censorship and more so support and encouragement, we are encouraging, one, better writers, two, active participants in the community.
The minute administrators review a student publication before press, they open themselves up for liability. So why do administrators continue to practice prior review?
Well, as administrators, we are charged by our community, by our school board, to do what we believe that is in the best interest of the school, of the community. And based upon the needs of that community, based upon the expectations of that community, the administrator will have to make what sometimes is a really hard decision. Not always the right decision, but a decision nonetheless that he or she is going to have to support. And in that effort, they must always keep in the best interest of not only the community, but also the best interest of their students. And they are charged with making that decision. Once again, it's not an easy one to make.
Now, you're comfortable not having prior review.
We have, as a district, as a school, elected historically over the 50 years of our school to allow our students to express themselves in written and verbal form without prior review. In the instance that if an error takes place, or even if it will stir up some controversy, well, once again, this is about learning. And if controversy helps our students learn, helps us learn as a community, then so be it. But just because it's controversy doesn't make it right or wrong. It is what it is. If it's something that needs to be published or something that needs to be shared and it's an interest story to the community, and once again, that community is very broad, then it needs to be published. Everything that goes into the Indianapolis Star, our local paper, doesn't always make people smile and walk around. It makes people think. And if it makes you think, then the paper is doing its job of reporting what's going on in our community.
If a controversial story is going to go to press, would you like to know about it ahead of time?
Well, as a courtesy, our publications department gives the administrative team an advance copy of the paper. And all we do is look at it. There is no, hey, I want this out, hey, let's take this out. They provide us with this as a courtesy. We look at it, and if we need to start making plans based upon the fact that it's a very popular or powerful group that's being identified in this particular article, then it is the administrative team that's going to receive the phone calls. Although we are talking about free speech, we're talking about the First Amendment, we're also talking about students. And thus, when a parent has a complaint, the parent doesn't call the journalist who wrote it. Sometimes the parent doesn't call the director of publications. They're going to call the assistant principal or the principal. We're the ones who take the phone calls, we're the ones who take the complaints, and we're the ones who will sit down with a community-wide meeting over a particular article. It's also that principal or assistant principal, whichever the administrator is in charge, who's the one, depending upon the community, that the community leaders may be asking to be replaced. You don't go out and ask to replace the students. You ask to replace the principal who's in charge who allowed to go out. So whoever he or she is better have broad shoulders and willing to support their kids if they're not going to use prior review.
How important is the relationship between advisors and administrators?
I think the relationship between a principal and advisor should be as strong as the relationship between a teacher and the principal. The principal hires what he believes to be the best qualified person for the job, who's also the best fit for the job, who can do the best work with our kids over time, not just in one setting. And when you hire a teacher or advisor, you are hiring the best person, someone who has the best interests of our kids, someone who is the best trained, and therefore when you hire what you consider to be the best applicant, then you are putting into that classroom a professional. And as a professional, they deserve the supports and trust that are afforded them because of their abilities. The principal, the assistant principal, should not have to look over the shoulder of the advisor, questioning his or her decision. And as the advisor, if they have a strong relationship, should respect the principal enough to let them know what's coming down the pipeline. That if this is going to stir up some controversy, let them know. Help him prepare for it. Not in the sense of I'm going to prepare by diffusing this and pulling the article, but prepare in the sense that I know my community is going to call in relationship to this. How are we collectively going to work together to answer their questions? Not make excuses, but answer their questions. For example, why did you let this go to print? Because the students printed it. Well, weren't you worried about the fallout? No. I was worried about if I censored this. So as a team, they need to work together, and a unified voice needs to be heard. And as the leader of the building, the principal should be the leader of that voice that should be heard. Thus, the director of publications, a sponsor, should be in a good relationship with the principal to ensure that only one voice is heard.
Looking at the conservative nature of principals, how can they balance the school's interest with the First Amendment?
Quite honestly, it's going to take exposure and experience for principals over time. The younger the principals, sometimes we see young principal mistakes because they're so conservative that they are afraid to take chances because they're not overly secure in themselves and or their position, as anyone would be a teacher or a sponsor early in their career. And that's why we see that conservative nature, but we've got to expose these individuals, these young administrators, to new experiences, to see how it's done elsewhere. But they've also got to still be conscious of the fact of what is acceptable in their community. Any teacher or advisor also has to be considerate of their community. What is it that our constituents, our patrons, what is it that they want to see and or read about? And if something controversial comes up, well, the principal is going to have to put him or herself on the line at some point. Like I said, sometimes it's the advisor, but most of the time it's the principal who's going to catch the heat for a controversial issue. So I think education is a key to their success. I think exposure is key to their success. And I think confidence is key to their success. You've got to be confident in what you do when you're working with your community, be that just simply with a classroom teacher or be that with an advisor. You've got to be educated and confident and secure in what you're doing.
What effect does a free student press have on the rest of the student body?
I think one of the major impacts is it causes the students to read. Is there something in there that they're interested in? We've got English teachers who work hard every day, and sometimes they still have dissatisfied or disinterested kids in their class. But when the article is written by one of your colleagues, one of your cohorts, over a topic that you're interested in, be that a review of a school dance or party, or be that some major issue, social issue that took place in school, or some decision by the administration, and you're calling it, as a writer, you're calling into question, these are sometimes the thoughts of the students. And I think that's important for the simple fact that it gets them interested in reading, and then in some instances writing, because they're going to write a response. They don't always have to agree with student publications, and this may cause someone to put down on pen and paper their dissatisfaction or satisfaction with the decision by the administration, by the school district. As well, I think the students need a voice. They've got to have a voice that is not simply a matter of we're the adults and we're going to do it because we said so. Well, it's a system of, to be honest, it's almost a system of checks and balances where the students have a say. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to cause a change, but that means that they have a voice. If that voice happens to be the agent of change, so be it. So be it. It's the old adage, sometimes as adults we're so close to the forest, we don't even see that there's a tree there. And maybe it'll take a 15, 16, 17-year-old voice to cause us to step back and reevaluate what we're doing, because we're supposedly doing everything in the best interest of the child. In regards to student journalism, in regards to the ability of the school administrator, I think that it's a partnership that must be fostered and maintained, and it's going to take time, and there's going to be bumps in the road. And as I said earlier, if the advisor is well qualified and well prepared, and he or she is producing a product, and that product is well educated and productive students, journalists, then the administrator must do the same. He or she must be well educated in regards to the First Amendment. He or she must be brave and courageous enough to support his or her students in their endeavors. It should not be situational support, it should be consistent support. And over time, it will foster a very productive and impressive student journalism program.